Right, the next step is to start to work some detail into the flower heads. What I've done, I've reduced my brush size down, so I was working with a 1-inch flat brush. I've gone down to a 1/2-inch brush just to give me a little bit more flexibility on how I work into the detail. And for the first time I've squeezed some white out now because we're going to start building back the shape of the flowers. I've lost the edges a little bit with my background, but it's not a problem with acrylics because you can just work over the top and keep working from light to dark or dark to light. Acrylics offer you that flexibility. So just with pure white, I'm going to start building in some of the flower detail. So I'm refinding the edges. Not filling all of the surface again. Because I've got this canvas board, it allows me texture. So I can flick the brush over the surface and leave a nice broken edge in places. Use my finger a little bit as well just to break that paint up. Never be afraid to use your fingers. And this flower here, again, I'm flicking the brush away from the centre of the flower so it gives this nice soft edge to it. We don't want all hard edges everywhere. We want a little bit of painterliness, if that's such a word, going into the painting. So that's just bringing back the flower head shapes. I'll just introduce a slightly different shape there. That's quite a nice bit. Just flicking up there. And we'll do the same on this one. There's a nice big petal sweeping around here. Just get that going. What it's also doing, it's starting to lose the pen line now. We don't really want too much of the pen line showing on the flowers. It's quite nice if you get rid of that at this stage. It's been very useful for us thus far because it's just helped keep refinding and finding the edges. So that's just very quickly got them in. I think what I'll do while I'm at it, there is a suggestion of flowers on the edge, so I'll just give an impression of some more magnolia heads just right to the edge of the picture, but just an impression. I don't want to be as detailed as the others, so really I've got in my mind the general shape of them. So just flick those colours around, and then we've got a nice twig that the parts are supported off, the flowers are supported off, so just take that through as a guide so that I've got something to work with a little bit later. Now it's time to work on the centres of the flowers. It's often the centre, I think, of a flower, almost like the eye in an animal, that really brings them to life. So I'm going to make a mixture of yellow ochre and a bit of burnt sienna, a tiny touch of red, just to bring out those flower centres. I try not to do too much mixing in the palette, but rather picking up individual bits of colour on the brush and just letting them mix on the surface. I think you get a much nicer result when you do that. Again, these flat brushes are super for this because you can very quickly flick in the shape of the centre of the flower. Just needs a little bit of dark. I've squeezed out a little bit of purple in there, or a violet, and that just gives us a nice dark on that side. And I can just flick that up there as well, the same colour. But as you can see on my brush, there's quite a mixture of colours sitting there, so I'm continually rotating the brush, just introducing a slightly different colour in different places. Very quickly work through those. We don't have to pay quite so much attention to the ones on the edges. They're just supporting actors in the paintings. We really want the eye to go more to the centre of the painting, to the focal point. We now need some shadows and tone going into these flower heads, and I've got a violet and a blue and a white, so I'm going to use a combination of those to create the shadows in the petals. This is a little bit hit and miss, so I generally just make the mixture up in the palette first and then just give it a test on here just to see, just make sure I don't go too dark too soon. That's not too bad. Maybe just add a little bit of white as we move up towards the outer edge of the petal so that it's not all exactly the same. Bring that through there. And we want a bit of tone on the back. Again, I'm using this action of pressing the brush and flicking it away. It gives you a much more painterly mark when you're working. And this just helps to give your flower heads a little bit more form. If you go wrong, don't worry, because you can always put more white on top of that. It's amazing when you start to do this how everything starts to come to life. This one that sits at the back, that wants a lot more shadow on it, so it doesn't become too obtrusive. And we can just flick some bits of tone on those as well. This petal's got quite a big shadow, so there's very little of this part of the flower catching the light. I'm going to get the flower heads to a certain stage, but I'm not going to finish them at this stage. It's always best on a painting to keep the whole thing going at the same time. So I'm going to get them to a reasonable state, and then I'm going to work on the surrounding foliage and leaves, and then I can come back to the flower heads and just titivate them a little as I develop the painting. So I think that'll do for now. I'm now going to start putting the leaves in, all the surrounding leaves, just to give it that extra bit of interest. People have a lot of trouble with greens. Generally, with acrylics, I often find if you've got a bright yellow, like a lemon yellow or a cadmium yellow, you can usually get quite a good range of greens, especially if you mix it with either an ultramarine, or I like the phthalo blue green shade. That combined with the bright yellows gives you some really good varieties of greens. So let's go in first. Yeah, looking at that's really bright. I'm going to push a bit of red into that mix just to knock it back slightly. And now it's a matter of developing the leaf shapes. And a chisel brush again is useful for this because we can get the partially mixed paint onto it. I've started with a dark combination of the blue and the yellow, then I've added a lot more yellow on the outer edge and just let that flick down. So I'm just using the shape of the brush to develop these really nice leaf shapes. It's a really super brush to use for that, and a bit of neat lemon yellow on the end, and just push that back in again. I'm not too worried about light direction really. I'm making it up as I go along, but it's nice if you just get highlights bouncing around the painting. Put a little tiny bit of purple in it so that we get some slightly more subtle leaf shapes. Which is really the background showing through. Now a little bit of yellow ochre, not too strongly mixed, and we're just going to hint at some less detailed leaf shapes in different parts of the painting. So that's the leaves basically laid out. What I'm going to do now is work some of the twigs and the sticks that are sitting in the background. What I'm doing now, I'm moving on to a finer round brush. This is a size 8 round synthetic brush. So burnt sienna, we'll start with that. I'm going to paint through now where the twigs run through the painting. Putting a little bit of yellow ochre on the brush as well. I've not mixed it, and I'm just slightly rolling the brush in my fingers so I present a slightly different colour to the painting surface. There's a little bit of Naples yellow on there as well now. That'll flick through there. I'm not bothering to wash the brush out. I'm just putting different colours around the brush. So there's a little bit of black gone on now. And I'm constantly thinking now about the background, so when I'm painting against the slightly lighter background, just use some slightly lighter pigment. What I'm doing with the brush, I'm doing this in a circular sweeping motion, so as the brush just catches the surface and then I lift, and you get these nice thin shapes that represents the twigs. We're getting well on into the painting now, and I always think this is a really good point to have a breather. Just sit back, have a look at what you've done, and then decide where you need to make your little tweaks to sort of develop the painting to its finished stage. Right, I've left the painting for a few minutes now, and it's dried off a little, and it's just given me time to step back and assess the situation. I think I just need to tidy it up in one or two places and add just a little bit of extra detail. So I'm going to start with this leaf that drops down here. I'm just going to put just a tiny bit of detail into there. So we'll have that central spine going down, and I'll just curl the edge of the leaf up there. So I'll just get a little bit of light catching on that area. And then the centres of the flowers, they just need a bit of tidying up too. So I'm just mixing burnt sienna with a little bit of Windsor violet and just tidy those edges up, and just add a little bit of dark on one side so we get the contrasts against the white petals. Going back in with a little more white and use that. The shape's not very good there, so just tidy that up a little and just pop a bit more on various parts of the petals around the painting. You only need a small brush for this stage, and it's just to get those extra little bits in there. Again, the finger's very useful here, because when you paint wet acrylics on to dry, they do tend to stand up a little, so just get your finger, push those back into the painting surface. A little bit of black now. Bring some of that through. Black's incredibly useful. Just sharpens up the whole thing. And it's always a good idea to get your darkest darks against your lightest light. So pushing in these blacks and browns against the white petals really makes them come forward. And it's also useful just getting your shape back in places. I notice here it's not quite the right shape there. So again, I'm mixing up burnt sienna and raw sienna, a little bit of Naples yellow in there, and just recapture my original thoughts on that, and maybe a bit of black in there as well. And now just requires a little bit into the centre of the flower. Tidy these bits that are projecting out. Flick a little bit of paint through that I've got remaining on the brush. Just gives a few little highlights as if they're shining through gaps in the hedgerow. And I think that's about it. So that brings me to the end of this programme. Join me next time when I'll be painting really loose roses.
Now available to buy. Try these techniques at home whenever you wish. The extended DVD of today's workshop and the book that accompanies this series are now available from the Painting and Drawing channel. For further information and to order your copy, go to www.paintingdrawingchannel.com.